The waitress warned him once. "Drink your coffee while it's hot," she said. "By Monday, everything you own could be gone." He laughed. Then she told him about the forged data, the buried deaths, and the investigation that would destroy his company in 72 hours. She knew things no one was supposed to know. And the moment he listened, she became a problem powerful people would kill to silence. This is the story of what happened next. The coffee was cold, and Marcus Whitfield didn't drink cold coffee. "This is unacceptable," he said, pushing the cup away from him like it had personally offended his $4,000 suit. "We've been sitting in this place for 20 minutes, and I'm drinking something that tastes like it was brewed during the Clinton administration." His friend Derek laughed from across the booth. "Relax, Mark. The jet will be fixed in a few hours. Consider this an adventure. When's the last time you stepped foot in a real American diner? There's a reason I avoid them." The diner was called Opal's Place, a small roadside establishment in Harlan County, Kentucky, that looked like it hadn't been renovated since 1987. The floor tiles were cracked in places. The vinyl booth seats had been patched with tape. A handwritten sign above the register read, "Good food, good people, good prices," in faded red marker. Marcus hated everything about it. 30 minutes earlier, his private jet had experienced engine trouble somewhere over Kentucky. The pilot made an emergency landing at a tiny regional airport, and while the maintenance crew worked on the aircraft, Marcus and his 3 investment banker friends had spotted this diner across the road. "Come on," Derek had said. "It'll be funny. When's the last time any of us ate at a place without a sommelier?" Now Marcus sat in a cracked booth, surrounded by locals who kept glancing at his expensive watch, wondering why he'd ever agreed to this. "Excuse me," he called out, snapping his fingers. "Can we get some service here?" The woman behind the counter didn't flinch. She finished wiping down a coffee maker, set down her rag, and walked over to their table with a small notepad. She was maybe mid-40s, with tired eyes and hands that looked like they'd worked hard for decades. Her name tag said, Opal. She wore no makeup, no jewelry, except a simple wedding band, and her expression was completely neutral, like she'd seen 1,000 men like Marcus and had stopped being impressed a long time ago. "What can I get you, gentlemen?" Derek grinned. "Well, hello there. What's good here?" "Everything's good. That's why people come back." "She's feisty," Derek said to the others, and they laughed. Opal didn't react. Marcus sighed. "I'll have coffee, fresh coffee, and make sure it's actually hot this time." Opal wrote it down without comment. "Anything else?" "That'll be all. For now." She walked away, and Marcus's friend Richard leaned in. "Can you imagine living out here, working in a place like this? What do you think she makes? $8 an hour? 9? Probably less," Marcus said. "These small towns are dying. No opportunities. No future. Just this." He gestured vaguely at the diner, at the worn furniture, at the old photographs on the walls, showing the town in what must have been better days. Derek was still watching Opal as she poured fresh coffee behind the counter. "Hey, Mark, you should ask her for investment advice. Get a real grassroots perspective on the market." The table erupted in laughter. "Oh, that's perfect," Richard said. "Ask her what she thinks about your Nexian position. I'm sure she's got strong opinions on pharmaceutical valuations." Marcus smiled despite himself. "You know what? Maybe I will." When Opal returned with his coffee, steaming hot this time, Marcus put on his most charming smile. The one that had closed billion-dollar deals. The one that made people feel like they were being let into an exclusive club. "Hey, sweetheart," he said. "I've got a question for you." Opal set down the coffee cup. "What's that?" "My friends and I were just discussing investments, portfolio management, that sort of thing." He paused for effect, waiting for the confused look that always came when he talked about money with regular people. "I was wondering, do you have any stock tips for me?" Derek nearly choked on his water, trying not to laugh. Marcus waited for the blank stare, the nervous laugh, the "I don't know anything about that stuff" that would confirm everything he believed about people like her. Instead, Opal looked at him, really looked at him. Her eyes moved across his face, like she was reading something written there, something he didn't even know existed. Then she spoke. "Actually," she said, her voice calm and quiet, "if I were you, I'd sell your entire position in Nexion Pharmaceuticals before the market opens on Monday." The laughter at the table died. Instantly, Opal continued, her tone unchanged, like she was reading off the daily specials. "Your CFO Raymond Voss has been falsifying clinical trial data for your lead drug candidate for the past 3 quarters. He's also been inflating revenue numbers to hide the R&D losses. The SEC has been building a case for months, and they're scheduled to announce a formal investigation in about 72 hours. She paused and looked directly into Marcus's eyes. "If you're still holding when that news breaks, you'll lose somewhere between $2 and $2.3 billion in market cap. Probably your board seat too, depending on how much they can pin on you personally." She set down a small container of cream beside his coffee. "Anything else I can get you?" Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. Derek's mouth was hanging open. Richard looked like he'd seen a ghost. Marcus felt his heart hammering against his ribs. That's not funny," he finally managed. "I'm not joking. Mr. Whitfield, how do you know my name? Your face was on the cover of Forbes 3 months ago. I read." She tucked her notepad into her apron. "Your coffee's getting cold again. I drink it while it's hot." Then she turned and walked away, leaving 4 men in stunned silence. If you're new to this channel, go ahead and hit that subscribe button, because this story is just getting started, and trust me, you don't want to miss what happens next. Marcus excused himself from the table and stepped outside, his hands shaking as he pulled out his phone. He called his head of security first. "I need you to run a deep check on Raymond Voss. Everything. Bank accounts, travel records, communications. Everything." "Sir, is something wrong?" "Just do it, now." He hung up and called his inside contact at a major law firm, a man who always seemed to know what the regulators were doing before they did it. "Daniel, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me." "Always, Marcus. What's going on? Is there an SEC investigation into Nexion?" Silence on the other end. "Daniel? Where did you hear that?" Marcus's stomach dropped. "So it's true. I can't confirm or deny anything, you know that. But Marcus, if someone told you something, you should probably listen." He hung up and stood there in the parking lot of a roadside diner in rural Kentucky, feeling like the ground had shifted beneath his feet. A waitress in a cracked tile diner, had just told him something that none of his analysts, none of his advisors, none of his highly paid executives had ever mentioned. And she was right. He walked back inside. His friends were still sitting there, trying to process what had happened. "We should go," Richard said quietly. "This is weird. This whole thing is weird." But Marcus wasn't listening. He was watching Opal, who had moved on to serving an elderly couple at the counter. She laughed at something the old man said, refilled his coffee, touched his shoulder gently, like nothing had happened. Like she hadn't just dropped a bomb that could reshape Marcus's entire financial future. He walked over to the counter and sat down on one of the worn stools. Opal glanced at him, but kept working. "Coffee still not right? Who are you?" "I told you. I'm Opal. I own this place." "That's not what I mean, and you know it." She stopped wiping the counter and looked at him. For a moment, something flickered in her eyes. Something old and tired and deeply buried. "I'm just a waitress, Mr. Whitfield. Waitresses don't know about SEC investigations. They don't know about falsified clinical trials. They don't casually mention things that could cost someone $billions." Opal was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, Some people read the financial pages, Mr. Whitfield. Some people read between them. That's not an answer. It's the only answer you're going to get. She turned to walk away, but Marcus reached out, not grabbing, just a gesture that made her pause. "Please," he said. And the words surprised him. He couldn't remember the last time he'd said please to anyone. "I need to understand." Opal looked at his hand, then at his face. Whatever she saw there made her expression soften, just slightly. "You want to understand," she said quietly. "Then understand this. The truth is expensive, Mr. Whitfield. Some people pay for it with money. Some people pay for it with their careers. And some people—" She touched the wedding band on her finger, almost unconsciously. "Some people pay for it with everything they have." She pulled away and walked into the back kitchen, leaving Marcus sitting alone at the counter with more questions than he'd ever had in his life. Marcus couldn't leave. His friends had gone back to the airport to wait by the jet, but he stayed. He ordered pie he didn't eat and coffee he didn't drink, and he watched Opal work. She moved through the diner like water, smooth, unhurried, completely in control. She remembered every regular's name. She knew who took cream and who took sugar. She asked about children and grandchildren and doctor's appointments like she genuinely cared. Maybe she did. When the lunch crowd thinned out, Marcus made his move. He walked up to the counter with his checkbook in hand. "I want to hire you." Opal didn't look up from the receipts she was organizing. "I have a job. I'll pay you $500,000, one consultation. Tell me what else you see that I'm missing." Now she looked up. "That's a lot of money for a conversation. You saved me over $2 billion with 30 seconds of talking. I'd say 500,000 is a bargain." Opal set down the receipts. She studied him for a long moment, and Marcus felt like he was being weighed on some invisible scale. "No thank you," she said. "$1 million then." "No. Everyone has a price." Something shifted in Opal's face. The professional warmth disappeared, replaced by something harder, something that had been buried for a long time. "You're right, Mr. Whitfield. Everyone does have a price." She leaned forward slightly. "I found out what mine was about 10 years ago. I paid it in full, and I decided I'm never paying it again." "What does that mean?" "It means your jet is probably fixed by now. It means you should go back to your life in New York and forget you ever walked into this diner. It means some things aren't for sale, no matter how many zeros you put on a check." She picked up the receipts and walked into the back office, closing the door behind her. Marcus stood there, rejected in a way he hadn't experienced in decades. He was Marcus Whitfield. He'd bought companies. He'd bought politicians. He'd bought everything he'd ever wanted, but he couldn't buy Opal. That bothered him more than he wanted to admit. The jet was indeed fixed. Marcus flew back to New York that night, but he couldn't sleep. He kept seeing Opal's face, hearing her words, wondering what had happened to make a woman like that end up in a roadside diner in Kentucky. The next morning, he called his head of security. "I need everything you can find on a woman named Opal. She owns a diner in Harlan County, Kentucky, called Opal's Place." "That's not much to go on, sir." "Then dig deeper." 3 days later, a file landed on Marcus's desk. He opened it expecting to find a simple background check, maybe some financial troubles, maybe a criminal record, something that would explain her situation. What he found made him sit down slowly. Her full name was Opal Renee Blackwood. 10 years ago, she had been one of the most respected forensic accountants in the country. She specialized in detecting corporate fraud, and she was exceptional at it. She'd helped the Department of Justice bring down 2 major corporations, including the Kelman Industries scandal that had made national headlines. Her husband was Thomas Blackwood, a senior financial analyst at a firm called Whitmore and Associates. 8 years ago, Thomas had discovered massive fraud at a pharmaceutical company called Vantage Medical. They were falsifying drug safety data, bribing FDA officials, and hiding deaths in clinical trials. Thomas became a whistleblower. He started working with federal investigators to build a case. 3 months later, he was dead. Single car accident on a rural highway. Brake failure. Case closed. Except it wasn't an accident. At least Opal didn't think so. She'd spent 2 years trying to prove it, burning through her savings, losing her job, watching her reputation get destroyed by the same people her husband had tried to expose. The case against Vantage Medical was quietly dropped. The executives kept their jobs. The bribes kept flowing. And Opal Blackwood, broken, bankrupt, and afraid, took her teenage daughter and disappeared. She ended up in Kentucky, running a diner under her middle name, hiding in plain sight. Marcus closed the file and stared out his window at the Manhattan skyline. He thought about all the people who worked for him, the analysts, the advisors, the executives. How many of them would risk everything to tell the truth? How many of them would sacrifice their careers, their safety, their families to do the right thing? He already knew the answer. None of them. Not a single one. But Opal had. And the system had crushed her for it. 2 weeks later, Marcus did something that surprised everyone who knew him. He cleared his schedule, dismissed his security team, and flew back to Kentucky alone. When he walked into Opal's place, the bell above the door chimed, and Opal looked up from behind the counter. Her expression shifted from professional welcome to guarded recognition. You again. Me again. I thought I was clear last time. You were. Marcus sat down at the counter. I'm not here to offer you a job. Then why are you here? Because I sold Nexion. Opal went very still. Marcus continued. I liquidated my entire position the Monday after I met you. Took a small loss on the timing, but nothing major. 3 days later, the SEC announced their investigation. Stock dropped 47% in a single day. He pulled out his phone and showed her a headline. Nexion Pharmaceuticals under federal investigation for clinical trial fraud. You saved me $2.1 billion, Marcus said quietly. A waitress in a Kentucky diner told me the truth when 100 people on my payroll didn't, couldn't, or wouldn't. Opal's face was unreadable. Congratulations, you kept your money. Is that why you're here? To say thank you? Because you could have sent a card. I'm here because I can't stop thinking about you. Mr. Whitfield. Not like that. He reached into his jacket and pulled out an envelope. This is a trust fund for your daughter. $400,000 for her education, managed by a third party, completely anonymous, no strings attached. It's not payment. It's not a bribe. It's just a thank you from someone who didn't deserve your help but got it anyway. Opal stared at the envelope like it might explode. I don't want your money. I know you don't. That's why I'm giving it to you. That doesn't make sense. Maybe not. Marcus pushed the envelope toward her. But for the first time in a long time, I'm trying to do something that isn't about making sense. I'm trying to do something that's just right. Opal didn't touch the envelope. Her eyes were shining now, and Marcus realized with a start that she was close to tears. You read about me, she said. It wasn't a question. Yes. Then you know what happened. To my husband, to my career, to everything. I know what the files say. I know you lost everything trying to tell the truth. I know the system failed you in every possible way. A tear slipped down Opal's cheek, but her voice stayed steady. Then you know why I can't take anything from you, why I can't get involved in that world again. Every time I did, someone I loved got hurt. Opal, you want to know what I want, Mr. Whitfield. Really want. She finally looked at him, and the pain in her eyes was almost unbearable. I want my husband back. I want to wake up next to him and hear him laugh and watch him play with our daughter. I want the last 10 years back. I want to have never walked into that office at Vantage Medical. I want to have never seen those files. Her voice cracked. I want the people who murdered my husband to face what they did. I want someone, anyone, to tell me that his death meant something, that all of this suffering meant something. She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. But I can't have any of that. So I'll settle for being left alone. I'll settle for this diner, and my daughter, and my quiet little life. And I'll ask you respectfully to please stop trying to save me. Before you go any further, drop a comment below and tell me what you think Opal should do. Should she trust Marcus? Should she stay hidden? I'm reading every comment, and I want to hear your thoughts. Marcus sat with her words for a long moment. Then he nodded slowly. Okay, I understand. He stood up and left the envelope on the counter. But if you ever change your mind, if you ever need anything, you know how to find me. He turned to leave. Mr. Whitfield. He stopped at the door. Marcus, Opal said quietly. Thank you for listening. It was the first time she'd used his first name. He nodded once and walked out into the Kentucky afternoon. But what neither of them knew was that Marcus's sudden sale of Nexian stock had triggered alarms in places they couldn't see. Raymond Voss, the CFO Marcus had been warned about, was desperately trying to figure out who had tipped off the billionaire. He'd called in favors, hired investigators, traced every possible leak, and in a dark office in Manhattan, a man named Leonard Kane was reading a very interesting report. Kane was 65 years old, a former CEO with silver hair and cold eyes. 10 years ago, he'd run Vantage Medical, the same company that Thomas Blackwood had tried to expose. The same company that had never faced justice. Kane had spent a decade making sure the Blackwood case stayed buried. He'd paid off witnesses, destroyed evidence, and ruined anyone who asked too many questions. He'd thought Opal Blackwood was gone forever, broken and forgotten. But now his people had discovered something troubling. Marcus Whitfield, one of the richest men in America, had visited a small Kentucky diner twice in 2 weeks. A diner owned by a woman who matched the description of someone Kane had hoped he'd never hear about again. He picked up his phone and dialed Raymond Voss. We have a problem, Kane said, and we need to solve it, permanently. The first sign was the car. Opal noticed it on a Tuesday morning. A black sedan parked across the street from the diner. Tinted windows, no plates she could see. It sat there for 3 hours, engine running, then drove away. The next day, it was back. She told herself it was nothing. Maybe someone waiting for a friend. Maybe a salesman making calls. Maybe her imagination playing tricks on her after years of looking over her shoulder. But then the phone calls started. The diner's landline would ring, and when she answered, there was nothing but silence on the other end. Not a hang-up, just breathing. Quiet, patient breathing. Then the line would go dead. It happened 4 times in 2 days. On Thursday, her daughter Lily came home from school with a strange look on her face. Mom, some guy was asking about you today. Opal's blood went cold. What guy? Where? Outside school. He said he was an old friend of yours from before we moved here. Asked how you were doing, if you were happy, if you still lived at the same address. What did you tell him? Nothing. I said I didn't know what he was talking about and walked away. Mum, you're scaring me. What's going on? Opal pulled her daughter into a hug, holding her tight. Nothing, baby. It's nothing. Just don't talk to strangers, okay? Anyone asks about me, about us, you don't know anything. Mom, promise me, Lily. I promise. That night, after Lily went to bed, Opal sat alone in her kitchen with all the lights off. She knew these signs. She'd seen them before. 10 years ago, in the weeks before Thomas died. The surveillance, the silent calls, the strangers asking questions. They'd found her. She didn't know how, and she didn't know why now after all these years, but they'd found her, and she knew exactly what came next. Her hands were shaking as she picked up her phone. She scrolled through her contacts until she found a number she'd saved but never planned to use. It rang twice. "Hello. Marcus, it's Opal." A pause. "Opal, is everything okay?" "No." Her voice cracked despite her best efforts. "No, everything is not okay. They found me." "Who found you?" "The people who killed my husband. The people I've been hiding from for 10 years. They know where I am. They've been watching me. Someone approached my daughter at school." "Are you sure? Maybe it's—" "I'm sure." She was crying now, and she hated herself for it. "I've seen this before, Marcus. I know what it looks like. I know what comes next. They're going to make sure I can never talk. They're going to make sure I disappear, just like Thomas." Silence on the other end. Then, "Where are you right now?" "Home. Lily's asleep." "Is your door locked?" "Yes." "Do you have a way to protect yourself?" "I have a baseball bat and a kitchen knife. That's about it." Marcus's voice shifted into something harder, more commanding, the voice of a man who was used to solving problems. "Listen to me carefully. I'm going to send someone to you. Tonight. His name is Derek Walsh. Not my friend Derek, a different one. He's ex-military, runs a private security firm. He'll be there in about 4 hours. Don't open the door for anyone until he arrives. He'll identify himself with the phrase, 'Whitfield sent me for the coffee.' Marcus, I can't ask you to—" "You're not asking, I'm telling." His voice softened. "Opal, you gave me something nobody else would. You told me the truth when it could have cost you everything. Now let me do something for you." She wiped her eyes. "Why? Why do you care what happens to me?" "Because you're the first real person I've met in 20 years. Because you reminded me that some things matter more than money. Because I've spent my whole life surrounded by people who tell me what I want to hear, and you told me what I needed to hear." He paused. "And because if something happened to you, and I did nothing to stop it, I'd never forgive myself." Opal closed her eyes. She'd spent so long being strong, being independent, being the one who protected everyone else. The idea of letting someone help her, really help her, felt foreign, dangerous, but she was so tired of being afraid. "Okay," she whispered. "Okay. Pack a bag for you and Lily, 1 bag each, only essentials. Derek will take you somewhere safe." "Where?" "I have a property in Virginia. Off the books, under a shell company. Nobody knows about it. You'll be safe there, until we figure out what's going on." "Marcus, I don't know how to thank you. Don't thank me yet. Just stay alive." 4 hours later, a black SUV pulled up to Opal's house. A large man with kind eyes and a military bearing knocked on the door. "Ma'am, Whitfield sent me for the coffee." Opal let out a breath she didn't know she'd been holding. "Give me 5 minutes." Waking Lily was the hardest part. Her daughter was confused, then frightened, then angry. "Mum, what's happening? Why do we have to leave?" "I'll explain everything later." "Baby, right now I need you to trust me. Is this about Dad? Is this about what happened to him?" Opal couldn't lie. Not to Lily. "Not about this." "Yes," she said quietly. "It's about your father." Lily's face changed. She'd been just 8 years old when Thomas died, but she remembered. She remembered her mother's screams. She remembered the funeral. She remembered the years of running. "Then let's go," Lily said, and her voice was steady in a way that broke Opal's heart. No 17-year-old should have to be this brave. 20 minutes later, they were in the SUV, watching their little house disappear in the rearview mirror. Opal didn't know if she'd ever see it again. The property in Virginia was more than she'd expected. A large farmhouse on 50 acres, surrounded by woods, with a security gate and cameras she could barely see. It was beautiful and isolated, and felt like the safest place she'd been in a decade. Marcus arrived the next morning. Opal met him on the porch, arms crossed over her chest. She'd barely slept. Lily was inside, finally resting. "This is too much," she said. "It's not enough." Marcus looked tired too, like he'd been up all night making arrangements. "I've got security on the perimeter. The house is swept for bugs daily. Nobody knows this place exists except me and 3 people I'd trust with my life. Why are you doing this?" "I told you why. You told me words. Pretty words about truth and integrity, but people like you don't do things for free. There's always an angle. There's always something you want." Marcus was quiet for a moment. Then he sat down on the porch steps, suddenly looking less like a billionaire and more like a tired man with too many burdens. "You're right," he said. "There is something I want." Opal waited. "I want to take them down, all of them. Raymond Voss, who's been stealing from my company for years. Leonard Kane, who murdered your husband and got away with it. The whole network. The bribes, the cover-ups, the bodies they've buried to protect themselves." He looked up at her. "I have money. I have resources. I have access to things most people can't imagine. But I don't have what you have." "What's that?" "Knowledge. You spent years investigating these people. You know where the bodies are buried, literally and figuratively. You know how they think, how they hide their tracks, how they move money around." He stood and faced her directly. "Help me destroy them, not for revenge, for justice, for your husband, for everyone they've hurt, for everyone they're going to hurt if someone doesn't stop them." Opal felt something stir inside her, something she'd buried 10 years ago when she decided that survival mattered more than justice. "And if I say no, if I just want to take my daughter and disappear again, then I'll help you do that too. I'll set you up somewhere safe, new identities, new lives, enough money to never worry again. You can walk away from all of this and I'll never contact you again. But they'll still be out there. They'll still be hurting people, and eventually they'll find you again. People like Leonard Kane don't stop. They can't, because once they start cleaning up loose ends, they can't afford to leave any threads hanging." Opal turned away, staring out at the Virginia woods. She thought about Thomas, about the man he'd been. Idealistic, brave, certain that truth would win in the end. He'd believed in the system. He'd believed that doing the right thing would protect him. It hadn't. She thought about Lily, about the life she wanted for her daughter, college, career, family, happiness. A life without looking over her shoulder, a life without fear. That life wouldn't exist as long as Leonard Kane was breathing. "If I do this," she said slowly, "we do it my way. Name your terms. Everything legal, every document verified, every source protected. No shortcuts, no vigilante justice, no playing by their rules." She turned to face him. "If we're going to bring them down, we do it the right way. The way Thomas would have done it. The way that means it sticks." Marcus nodded. "Agreed. And my daughter stays out of it. Whatever happens, whatever risk I take, Lily is protected. That's non-negotiable." "Done." Opal extended her hand. "Then we have a deal, Mr. Whitfield." Marcus shook it. "Call me Marcus. If we're going to war together, we should probably be on a first-name basis." For the first time in days, Opal almost smiled. "Okay, Marcus, let's talk about how to take down the people who destroyed my life. If you're enjoying this story, hit that like button right now. It helps more than you know. And trust me, what happens next is going to blow your mind." Inside the farmhouse, Lily had been listening from the hallway. She'd heard everything. The plan, the danger, the decision her mother had just made. She should have been scared. Part of her was. But a bigger part felt something she hadn't felt since she was 8 years old, standing at her father's grave. Hope. Her mother wasn't running anymore. Her mother was fighting back. And Lily realized in that moment that she'd been waiting for this day for half her life. She walked out onto the porch. "I want to help." Opal's face went pale. Lily, no. I told Marcus. I know what you told him. I also know that I'm 17 years old, and I remember everything. I remember Dad. I remember what he stood for. I remember what they took from us. She looked at Marcus, then back at her mother. You taught me that the truth matters, Mom. That's why Dad did what he did. That's why you did what you did. If you go back into hiding now, they win. They win forever. Opal's eyes filled with tears. Baby, it's dangerous. These people killed my father, I know. Lily's voice was steady. And I've spent 10 years being afraid of them. I'm done being afraid. I'm done letting them control our lives. She took her mother's hands. You don't have to do this alone, Mum. Not anymore. Opal pulled her daughter close. For a long moment, they just held each other. Mother and daughter, survivors, fighters. Marcus watched them and felt something shift in his chest, something he hadn't felt in a very long time. Purpose. All right, Opal said finally, wiping her eyes. Let's do this. Together. The work began the next morning. Marcus converted the farmhouse's basement into a command center. Secure computers, encrypted communications, whiteboards covering every wall. Opal stood in front of them with a marker in her hand, and for the first time in 10 years, she felt like herself again. Here's what we know, she said, drawing connections between names and companies. Raymond Voss has been cooking Nexian's books for at least 3 years, but he's not smart enough to do this alone. Someone taught him. Someone protected him. She drew a line to another name, Leonard Kane. Kane was CEO of Vantage Medical when Thomas started investigating them. After Thomas died and the case collapsed, Kane quietly retired with a $200 million golden parachute. But he didn't stop working. He just went underground. Marcus studied the board. What do you mean? Kane runs a shadow consulting firm. On paper, he advises pharmaceutical companies on regulatory compliance. In reality, he teaches them how to commit fraud without getting caught. He connects them with corrupt FDA officials, shows them how to falsify trial data, and when things go wrong, he makes problems disappear. Problems like your husband. Opal's hand trembled slightly. Yes, problems like Thomas. How do we prove it? That's the hard part. Kane is careful. He never leaves fingerprints. Everything goes through intermediaries, shell companies, offshore accounts. She tapped the marker against the board. But every system has a weakness. Every criminal makes mistakes. We just have to find them. For 3 weeks they worked. Opal taught Marcus how to read financial statements like a detective novel, how fraud hides in the footnotes, in the timing of transactions, in the patterns that don't quite fit. Marcus provided access to resources she'd never had. Forensic accountants, data analysts, private investigators, with connections in places she couldn't reach. Lily helped too. She was better with computers than either of them, and she spent hours tracing shell companies through public records, building a map of Kane's hidden empire. Slowly the picture emerged. Kane wasn't just advising companies, he was extorting them. Once he helped them commit fraud, he owned them. They paid him millions in consulting fees to keep their secrets safe. And when someone threatened to expose the truth, Kane made them go away. They found 6 other cases. 6 people who had asked too many questions, who had seen too much, who had ended up dead in accidents that were never investigated properly. A car crash in Nevada, a drowning in Florida, a suicide in Oregon that friends and family said made no sense. Thomas wasn't Kane's only victim. He was just one of many. One night, Opal sat alone in the basement, staring at the board full of names and dates and deaths. Marcus found her there, tears streaming silently down her face. I spent 10 years thinking I was being paranoid, she whispered. 10 years wondering if maybe it really was just an accident. Maybe Thomas just lost control of the car. Maybe I was crazy with grief and seeing conspiracies that weren't there. She looked at Marcus, and the pain in her eyes was bottomless. But it wasn't paranoia. It was real. All of it. These people murdered my husband and 6 other innocent people, and they've been walking around free this whole time, going to parties, playing golf, sleeping soundly at night while I jumped at shadows. Marcus sat down next to her. He didn't try to touch her or comfort her with empty words. He just sat there, present, witnessing her pain. When Thomas died, Opal continued, everyone told me to move on. His family, my family, the lawyers. They said I was destroying myself with this obsession. They said I needed to accept what happened and build a new life. She laughed bitterly. So I did. I gave up. I took Lily and ran away and built a new life in a diner in Kentucky. And I told myself that was the brave thing to do, the healthy thing. It was survival, Marcus said quietly. There's nothing wrong with surviving. But it wasn't living. I was a ghost, Marcus. I've been a ghost for 10 years, going through the motions, serving coffee, pretending everything was fine while inside I was screaming. She wiped her eyes and looked at the board again. I'm tired of being a ghost. I'm tired of letting them win. Marcus was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, my father was a coal miner in West Virginia. Did you know that? Opal shook her head. He worked underground for 32 years. Black lung, bad back, hands that shook so much he couldn't button his own shirt at the end. When I was 15, the mine collapsed. 12 men died, including my father's best friend. The company knew the tunnels were unsafe. They had reports. They buried them. He stared at the wall. My father tried to sue. Tried to get justice for the men who died. You know what happened? The company's lawyers destroyed him, dragged his name through the mud, called him a disgruntled employee, a liar, a drunk. By the time they were done, nobody believed a word he said. What happened to him? He died 3 years later. Officially, it was the black lung. But I think it was shame. He thought he'd failed his friends, failed their families. He couldn't live with it. Marcus looked at Opal. I built my entire empire, telling myself I was different from those executives who killed my father's friends, that I was better than them. But you know what? I'm not. I've looked the other way 1,000 times when it was convenient. I've prioritized profits over people because that's what the system rewards. He stood up. But this time is different. This time I have a chance to actually do something that matters. Not for money, not for my reputation, just because it's right. He held out his hand to her. So let's nail these bastards. For Thomas. For my father. For everyone who ever got crushed by people who thought they were above consequences. Opal took his hand and stood. Okay, let's finish this. They compiled everything into a massive file, thousands of pages of documents, financial records, witness statements, and evidence. Opal organized it with the precision of the forensic accountant she'd once been. Every claim sourced, every connection documented, nothing left to chance. When they were done, Marcus made the calls. He had contacts at the Department of Justice from his years of political donations. He had relationships with SEC commissioners who owed him favors. And he knew 3 investigative journalists who had won Pulitzers and weren't afraid of powerful enemies. The evidence went out simultaneously to all of them, coordinated, overwhelming, impossible to ignore or suppress. Then Marcus did something that surprised even himself. He requested a meeting with Leonard Kane. They met at a private club in Manhattan, the kind of place where billionaires made deals that shaped the world. Kane arrived looking confident, silver hair perfectly styled, expensive suit, the easy smile of a man who had never faced consequences for anything. Marcus, he said warmly, shaking hands, I have to admit, I was surprised by your call. We don't exactly run in the same circles. Maybe we should. I've been hearing interesting things about your consulting work. Something flickered behind Kane's eyes, just a moment of calculation. But his smile never wavered. I'm always looking for new clients. Is there something I can help you with? Actually, I wanted to discuss a mutual acquaintance, a woman named Opal Blackwood. The smile froze. I don't know anyone by that name. Really? Because my sources tell me you've been looking for her, sending people to Kentucky, asking questions about a waitress who knows too much. Kane's mask slipped slightly. I think there's been a misunderstanding. There's no misunderstanding, Leonard. Marcus leaned forward. I know everything. Vantage Medical, the falsified trials, the bribes, Thomas Blackwood's murder and 6 others. I have documents, financial records, witness statements, everything. That's quite an accusation. I hope you have lawyers. I do. The best money can buy. But I won't need them. Is that so? Here's what's going to happen. In approximately 48 hours, the Department of Justice is going to announce a major investigation into corporate fraud, spanning multiple pharmaceutical companies. Your name will be prominently featured. The SEC will freeze your assets, and 3 major newspapers will publish detailed stories about how you've spent the last 2 decades profiting from fraud and murder. Kane's face had gone pale. You can't prove any of that. I don't have to prove it. I just have to hand the evidence to people who can. Marcus stood. You made one mistake, Leonard. You went after Opal. You thought she was weak, broken, alone. He buttoned his jacket. She's the strongest person I've ever met. And she was never alone. She just didn't know it yet. Marcus walked toward the door, then stopped. Oh, and Leonard, that evidence has already been delivered. Everything I just told you is already in motion. There's nothing you can do to stop it. This meeting wasn't a negotiation. It was a courtesy. So you'd know exactly who brought you down. He left Leonard Kane sitting alone in that exclusive club, watching his entire world collapse in slow motion. The next few months were chaos. The DOJ investigation made national news. Raymond Voss flipped immediately, giving up everything he knew in exchange for a reduced sentence. His testimony led to more arrests, more indictments, more dominoes falling. Leonard Kane tried to run. He made it as far as the Cayman Islands before federal agents caught up with him. He was extradited, charged with racketeering, fraud, and conspiracy to commit murder. Thomas Blackwood's case was reopened. New forensic evidence confirmed what Opal had always known. The brake lines had been cut. After 10 years, his death was officially reclassified as homicide. Opal testified before a congressional committee investigating corporate fraud. She sat at that long table, cameras flashing, and told her story, Thomas's story, to the entire country. She didn't cry. She didn't waver. She spoke with the quiet strength of someone who had walked through fire and emerged on the other side. When she finished, there was silence in the chamber. Then applause. First from the gallery, then from the committee members themselves. Lily watched from the audience, tears streaming down her face. She'd been 8 years old when her father died. She barely remembered his face, but now, watching her mother claim justice for him, she felt him there with them. Dad would be so proud of you, she whispered. Opal found her in the crowd and smiled through her own tears. 6 months later, things had changed. Opal had been offered positions at a dozen major firms, consulting companies, law firms, government agencies. She turned them all down. Instead, she started something new, the Blackwood Foundation, a non-profit dedicated to protecting whistleblowers and supporting forensic investigations into corporate fraud. Marcus provided the seed funding. Anonymously, of course. He didn't want credit, he just wanted to help. On a quiet afternoon in spring, he drove back to Kentucky. The diner had been sold to a local family. Opal couldn't keep running it after everything that happened, but he wanted to see it one more time. He sat at the counter where it all started. A young woman he didn't recognize brought him coffee. "You a friend of Opal's?" she asked. "Something like that." "She's a good lady." Whole town misses her. The woman studied him. She left something for you, actually. Said you'd come back eventually. She reached under the counter and handed him a small envelope. Inside was a handwritten note and a $1 bill. The note read, "For the coffee I never charged you for. Now we're even." Oh. Marcus laughed. A real laugh, from somewhere deep in his chest. He couldn't remember the last time he'd laughed like that. He tucked the note into his pocket and finished his coffee. It was good. Strong and hot and honest. Just like the woman who used to make it. Back in Virginia, Opal and Lily were moving into a new home. It wasn't big or fancy. Just a modest house with a garden and enough bedrooms for Lily to come home from college whenever she wanted. Lily was leaving the next morning. Full scholarship to Georgetown pre-law. She wanted to become a prosecutor, she'd told her mother. She wanted to make sure people like Leonard Kane never got away with anything again. "You're going to change the world," Opal said, hugging her daughter at the door. "I learned from the best." After Lily went to bed, Opal unpacked the last box. Inside, wrapped in newspaper, was an old photograph. Thomas, young and smiling, holding baby Lily on his lap. She touched his face through the glass. "We did it, Tom," she whispered. "We finally did it. It took me 10 years, but I kept my promise. I didn't let them win." She placed the photo on the mantel, in a spot where the morning sun would catch it. "I hope you can rest now. I think maybe I can too." Outside, the sun was setting over the Virginia hills, painting the sky in shades of gold and rose. Somewhere in the distance, a bird was singing. Opal stood at the window and watched the day end. For the first time in 10 years, she wasn't afraid of what tomorrow might bring. She was ready for it, and if you made it this far, thank you. Really. Stories like this only matter because people like you take the time to watch them, to feel them, to share them. If this one meant something to you, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss what's coming next. Every story I tell is about ordinary people who refuse to be defeated, who fight back when the world tells them to give up, who prove that one person with enough courage can change everything. That person could be you. Never forget that. Until next time.